I still remember the exact moment my heart stopped. We were sitting at a small, family-owned restaurant, the kind with dim lighting, hand-painted walls, and waiters who remembered your name. My parents had driven in from 3 hours away to meet Nathan, the man I thought I was going to marry. They wore their best clothes, clothes that may not have been expensive, but were pressed with love and pride. My father had even polished his shoes the night before. My mother brought a small box of sweets, something traditional from her hometown. She said Nathan looked thinner in person and needed to eat more. Nathan sat stiffly the entire dinner, eyes flitting from my dad's calloused hands to my mom's slightly chipped nail polish. He answered their questions with forced politeness, occasionally giving me a tight-lipped smile when they spoke too long. At first I thought he was just nervous, maybe overwhelmed. I tried to ease the tension by telling funny stories from our relationship, by showing how well we meshed despite our different backgrounds. But I could feel the wall growing thicker with every passing minute. By dessert, I could barely breathe. It was only after we left the restaurant that he let it all out. We were barely out the door when he turned to me, his voice sharp and disgusted. "You should have warned me," he said. "They're so poor." I felt like I was at some charity event. My jaw dropped, my mind struggling to process what he had just said. I thought I had misheard him. But then he kept going. Your dad's shoes, your mom's broken English, the way they kept offering me that weird food. It was embarrassing, to be honest. You're not poor, but your roots? They're a mess. That's not something you marry into, not in my world. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just stood there on the sidewalk, stunned as people passed us by, unaware of the explosion that had just shattered my chest. Nathan didn't seem to notice my silence. He kept walking, already unlocking his car, already moving on. I stared at his back and realized something terrifying. He hadn't been pretending to be someone else. This was who he really was. And I had fallen in love with a man who looked down on everything that made me who I was. That night, I didn't cry. I packed. But not just my things. I packed up the version of myself that had been trying to shrink, trying to fit into his mold of success, wealth, and status. I sat alone in my apartment and thought about my parents, about the sacrifices they made, about how they used to skip meals so I could have lunch money, about how my mom took on cleaning jobs late at night, and how my dad taught himself basic coding from library books just to help me build my first website when I was 16. And Nathan had the audacity to call them embarrassing? What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't just some pretty face with a humble background. While he was chasing corporate promotions, I had quietly built a startup from scratch. I had spent the last 6 years pouring everything into a fintech platform I founded alone, bootstrapped with scholarship money, late-night coding, and sheer determination. Just 2 months ago, I sold it to a private equity firm for 8 figures. The deal was under NDA, but I walked away with more money than Nathan would see in a lifetime. I didn't tell him. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. But that night changed everything. I woke up the next morning with one thought on my mind. I'm done hiding. I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to acquire majority shares in Echelon Tech, the very company where Nathan worked as a senior product manager. It wasn't hard. I already knew the company's valuation and had been casually watching it for months. It was a mid-size firm, profitable, but in need of strategic direction. My legal team moved fast. Within hours, we secured controlling interest. I became the majority shareholder, the new power behind the curtain. I scheduled an executive briefing for the next morning. Mandatory attendance. Nathan would have no idea until he walked into that boardroom. As the sun set that evening, I sat in my apartment in silence. My parents called to thank me again for dinner. They had no idea what Nathan had said. I didn't have the heart to tell them. Not yet. My mother said Nathan seemed quiet, but respectful. She hoped we would have a long and happy marriage. I told her not to worry, that things had changed, and they had. Because tomorrow morning, Nathan was going to walk into a meeting expecting to impress the board with a new product roadmap. Instead, He'd be looking straight into the eyes of the woman he had just humiliated, and she'd be signing his paycheck. The morning arrived quicker than I expected. I barely slept, my mind racing through 100 possible outcomes. Would he recognize me instantly? Would he try to talk to me? Apologize? Or would he continue to play Tay? I arrived at the Echelon Tech headquarters 15 minutes early. I'd been there before, during my due diligence phase. But this time was different. I wasn't a visitor. I was an owner. As I stepped into the building, wearing a sleek, tailored suit and my hair pulled back, no one questioned me. The receptionist greeted me with a smile, offered me coffee, and handed me a temporary badge. I declined the badge. I wouldn't need it after today. I walked straight to the executive boardroom. The glass walls overlooked the city skyline, and the table was already lined with bottled water and printed agendas. The senior leadership team began to file in. Some nodded politely, others offered tight smiles, likely wondering who I was and why they hadn't been told about me sooner. I introduced myself calmly, confidently, telling them we'd begin shortly. I didn't sit in the CEO's seat at the head of the table. Not yet. I waited. 10 minutes later, the door opened again, and Nathan walked in. He looked exactly the same. Polished shoes, pressed shirt, watch shining under the fluorescent lights. He was mid-conversation with a colleague, laughing about some client email. Then he looked up. His eyes scanned the room, landed on me, and froze. For a brief second, I saw confusion, then realization, then panic. He opened his mouth slightly, but no words came out. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, gave a polite nod, and finally took the seat at the head of the table. The CEO, Mark Hutchins, cleared his throat nervously and said, "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Ava, Ms. Rye. As of this morning, she's the majority shareholder at Echelon. We're very lucky to have her joining our board and advising on strategic direction moving forward." There was a round of polite applause. My name was now etched into their minds. Ma'am, Ms. Rye. No longer just Nathan's quiet, agreeable fiancé. Nathan stood in place, still silent. I could see his throat moving, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how to begin. He eventually sat down without a word, his body stiff, his jaw clenched. I spent the next hour going over the company's performance metrics, the areas I believed we could grow, the untapped markets we hadn't explored. I referenced my own background in fintech innovation without disclosing details about the company I sold. I was measured, focused, and in complete control. When I opened the floor to questions, Nathan kept his eyes on the table. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. After the meeting, the room cleared slowly. A few executives came over to introduce themselves more personally, expressing their excitement about working together. Nathan lingered by the doorway, clearly waiting to be the last one left. When it was just us, he approached me cautiously. "Ava," he began, his voice lower than usual. "What is this?" I didn't move. "This is what happens when you underestimate someone." He swallowed hard. "You bought the company?" "I didn't buy it," I corrected. "I own it. There's a difference." He stared at me, trying to find something to hold on to. Some leverage. Some scrap of control. "Why didn't you tell me you had money? That you were successful?" I gave a small, humorless laugh. "Because I wanted to know if you loved me for who I was. You answered that question loud and clear." His face reddened. "Ava, I was frustrated. That dinner, it just threw me off. I didn't mean any of that. I didn't—" "You meant every word," I said, cutting him off. "You looked down on the people who gave me everything, my parents. You mocked them. You mocked me. All because they didn't wear designer clothes or speak your language of arrogance. I was under pressure." "No," I said firmly. "You were being yourself." He fell silent. I stood up, gathering my notes, slipping them into my leather portfolio. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm not here for revenge. But I will say this. The man I loved died that night. I'm not mourning him. I'm moving on." He opened his mouth again, but I walked past him. Later that afternoon, HR informed Nathan that his current position would be evaluated as part of a strategic restructure following the change in ownership. They offered him a generous severance package and 3 months of advisory work. From home. Quietly phased out. No drama. Just business. I didn't fire him in front of anyone. That would have made it about ego. This was about clarity. In the days that followed, I received emails from other executives congratulating me. Some were curious about how a woman like me, young, private, previously invisible, had suddenly taken control, but none dared say it aloud, because in that boardroom I had earned their respect without ever raising my voice. And Nathan. He never texted, never called. He disappeared. Just like his mask. It would have been easy to walk away after that. I had taken my power back, preserved my dignity, and put Nathan exactly where he belonged, behind me. But even as the days passed and I buried myself in company strategy meetings, legal audits, and expansion planning, something still lingered. A heaviness I hadn't anticipated. I had won, technically. I had the power, the position, the story. But the victory didn't taste the way I imagined it would. Maybe it was because I had loved him, or who I thought he was. Maybe it was the way my mother kept asking when Nathan would visit again, still smiling whenever she mentioned his name. I hadn't told her anything. Not yet. There was a part of me that felt ashamed, not because of what Nathan did, but because I had let it happen. I had ignored the red flags, dismissed the condescension, painted over the cracks. For what? A picture-perfect future? Still, I kept moving forward. The company was thriving. With new leadership and a more inclusive direction, we were already seeing improved morale, higher productivity, and even client feedback that reflected the shift. I hired a few key people from underrepresented backgrounds, something I knew the previous board had resisted. And I created a scholarship fund in my parents' name for first-generation students interested in tech and finance. I told them it was from a grateful benefactor, but one day I'd tell them the truth. For now, their pride in me was enough. Weeks turned into months, and for the first time in years, I started to feel like I was living on my own terms. But fate, as always, has a twisted sense of timing. I was attending a private tech summit in San Francisco, an invite-only event for founders, investors, and execs. I was scheduled to speak on a panel about women in leadership and ethical disruption. As I walked through the lobby, checking into my suite, I heard a familiar voice behind me. I turned instinctively, and there he was, Nathan. He looked thinner, tired, less polished than before. His shirt was wrinkled, and he had grown a bit of stubble that aged him several years. For a second, neither of us said anything, just two ghosts meeting in a very expensive corridor. He broke the silence first. Didn't think I'd see you here. I gave a neutral nod. You're attending the summit? He shrugged. Trying to get back into the game, consulting gigs here and there. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He stepped a little closer. You look different. I smiled faintly. That's because I am. He exhaled and looked down at the floor for a moment. I've been meaning to reach out, but I figured you wouldn't want to hear from me. I wouldn't, I replied, still calm. But now that you're here, say what you need to say. He paused, then looked up again. His eyes were less sharp now, more human. I was arrogant, selfish, blind. I judged your parents because I didn't understand real strength. I thought status mattered more than character. I see how wrong I was. I studied his face, looking for insincerity, but for the first time he wasn't performing. He wasn't charming. He was just tired, humbled. I've thought about that night every day since it happened, he said. You didn't just outgrow me, you outclassed me. There was a time when hearing him admit that would have given me some twisted sense of closure. But in that moment, all I felt was distance. He was still trying to make sense of who I had become, not realizing that I had been this person all along. He just never looked deep enough to see it. "I didn't need you to be perfect," I said quietly. "I just needed you to respect where I came from." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I didn't. I'm sorry." I looked at him for a moment longer, then gently said, "Take care of yourself, Nathan." I walked away without waiting for a response. That conversation wasn't for him. It was for me. That evening, during my panel, I shared part of my story, not the scandal or the revenge, but the transformation. I spoke about the hidden strength of underdogs, about the underestimated power of empathy and grit. I talked about how the future of leadership wasn't about domination, but integrity. And when I finished, the room stood in silence, then erupted into applause. Later, a young woman approached me, eyes shining. "I'm the first in my family to go to college," she said, "and after hearing you speak, I feel like I belong here." That moment was worth more than any business deal, because that's what real power looks like: the ability to turn pain into purpose, to rise without needing to drag anyone down, to become so rooted in who you are that no one can shame you into shrinking. I didn't destroy Nathan. I simply left him behind and kept walking. The months that followed brought more change than I ever expected, not just professionally, though yes, echelons soared under the new leadership. We expanded into emerging markets, doubled our quarterly revenue, and became a rising name in ethical fintech. But that wasn't the part that mattered most to me. What stayed with me were the quieter wins. Like the young intern we hired from a community college who nearly cried when she saw my name on her offer letter, whispering that someone like her had never imagined being part of a tech company that looked like this. Or the email I received from a former janitor's son who had been accepted into the scholarship program named after my parents and was using the money to study engineering. "You don't know me," he wrote, "but you changed my life." I printed that email and framed it in my office. For the first time, I understood what real legacy meant. It wasn't just equity or acquisition or clout. It was leaving the door open behind you so someone else could walk through. One afternoon, while visiting my parents, I sat at the kitchen table and finally told them the truth. About Nathan, about what he'd said, about why we ended. At first, they were quiet. My mother's face fell. My father's hands curled slightly into fists. "He said that?" my mother whispered. "After we cooked for him?" I nodded slowly. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to ruin how you felt about that day. You were so happy." She reached across the table and touched my hand. "You should have let us be angry with you." I smiled, holding her hand tightly. "I know, but I wanted to handle it in my own way." My father, always a man of few words, finally spoke. "You did more than handle it. You made us proud." That was the moment I felt truly free, not because I had proven anything to the world, but because I had nothing left to hide. No masks, no shame, just me, fully, finally, myself. The years went on. Nathan faded further into memory. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he'd moved abroad, consulting for small firms and mostly keeping to himself. I never hated him, not even after everything. In the end, he was just a mirror, one that showed me who I didn't want to become. The funny thing is, people often assume this story is about revenge. It's not. It's about revelation, about understanding who you are and what you stand for when everything comfortable is stripped away. It's about realizing that some people will only see your worth once you have power, but that your true strength was never in what you owned. It was in what you survived. It was in how you carried your roots like armor instead of shame. So many times I've been asked, if you had the chance to go back, would you still have dated him? Would you still have let him meet your family, knowing how he'd react? And the truth is yes, because without that pain, I might have stayed small. I might have spent my life chasing validation from people who would never value me. I might have kept trying to make myself palatable to a world that sees humility as weakness. Nathan didn't break me. He revealed me. And now, years later, when I walk into boardrooms, When I speak to rooms full of young women, immigrants, dreamers, and builders, I tell them this: don't dim your light for anyone. Don't ever let someone shame you into thinking your past makes you less worthy of a brilliant future. The very things that make you different, they're not baggage. They're your roots, your edge, your legacy. I don't wear designer labels to prove my status. I wear my last name like a crown. I speak with the clarity of someone who doesn't need to impress a room, because I've already earned my seat at the table, not by stepping over people, but by refusing to stay beneath them. And if there's one final thing I could say to every woman watching this, especially the ones who've been made to feel too poor, too ethnic, too much, it's this: you don't have to destroy someone to rise above them. Just become so undeniable that they can't ignore your name. And if you're lucky, they'll have to call you ma'am. Comment below. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were better than you? What did it teach you? Like and subscribe if this story reminded you of your own strength or someone else's. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that they are already enough, with or without permission. Mic drop line. They laughed at my roots. Now they grow in the soil of my empire.